Iliad, Homer, Aeneid, Virgil, Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities, Homer, The Odyssey, Geoffrey Chaucer, Canterbury Tales. Here we go. Dante, Purgatorio. Most importantly, Dantes Inferno. 2 books of the Divine Comedy. The third being Paradiso, which I couldn't find, or Paradise. All 3 make up the Divine Comedy. What does that have to do with Nirvana? Keep watching. I am a classic literature nut, and when I mean classic, I mean like 2,000-year-old stories. I've read the Bible for fun. Okay, getting down to business. 2 weeks ago, I uploaded a video called The Selling of Nirvana, in which we just started to peek into who owns Nirvana, how much money's involved, all that stuff. And I had no way to predict the future. I had no way to know that 2 weeks later, Nirvana would be sued and a whole other can of worms would be opened. Just so we're all on the same page, let me read this paragraph out of an article by blabbermouth.net. They were the first to report this. On Wednesday, April 28th, Nirvana was sued. If I can, I always try to use the very first source, and in this case it was blabbermouth.net. We see right here, Jocelyn Susan Bundy on Wednesday, April 28, 2021, sued Nirvana LLC, Live Nation Merchandise LLC, and its Merch Traffic LLC unit, along with, this is interesting, Silva Artist Management LLC. For a bit of a change, instead of offering some answers, I am going to ask all of you a question because I cannot find the answer. Is Isaiah Silva, Frances Bean's ex-husband, either a son or relative to John Silva, who owns Silva Artistry Management? Remember, John Silva was originally Danny Goldberg's partner, much younger partner, who Danny Goldberg hired to find young new bands. In an interview with Danny Goldberg by musicbusinessworld.com, Danny tells us this. How did you first get to hear about and then work with Nirvana? I turned 40 that year, and I was aware that there was this new generation of rock and roll punk-influenced music coming out of indie labels, and that I maybe didn't have a really great ear for it. Goldberg managed people like Bonnie Raitt. He was an old school rock guy. So he says, so I hired a younger guy. That time-honored thing of older managers hiring younger guys who understand the new stuff better. In my case, I hired John Silva. Danny was an older guy. He managed old 70s, 80s bands. He wasn't really hip to what the kids were listening to in the 90s, so he hired a younger man, John Silva, to go out and recruit new fresh bands, one of them being Nirvana. That would go a long way to explain how Isaiah Silva met Frances Bean in the first place. I mean, after all, how do you meet someone like Frances Bean? You would have to be within an inner circle. And if Isaiah Silva is either the son of John Silva or a relative of John Silva, that would explain how they met. If you happen to know whether or not they are related, please drop it in the comments. Saying Nirvana had been using her grandfather, C.W. Scott Giles' drawings since 1997 on shirts, mugs, vinyl records, and other merchandise sold at stores including Walmart, H&M, and Hot Topic. The drawing depicts Dante's circles of upper hell, the 9 circles, in which each is a degree of hell. One gets worse than the last. The philosophy was, the worse the sin, the deeper level of hell you went. And Dante describes each level and basically what sins you would have to commit to end up in that level of hell. Now, this isn't a critique of Dante's Divine Comedy or the Inferno, but it is one of my favorite books, so if I reference it and talk about it throughout the video, I hope it doesn't annoy you. I encourage anyone to read Dante's Divine Comedy, the whole thing, not just the Inferno, read it all. This drawing, made up by Susan Bundy's grandfather, C.W. Scott Giles, was obviously not original. Dantes Inferno has been translated into languages all over the world, and much later, probably in the 60s or 70s, he drew a bunch of circles within each other, called it art, and then in 1989, Kurt Cobain, an avid book reader, said, "Man, this is an awesome design," slapped it on a t-shirt. And until 2021, 32 years later, no one had ever said a word about it. Now, let's back up to 2019. Do you guys remember when Dave Grohl sued fashion designer Marc Jacobs, who coincidentally, by the way, was one of Frances Bean's favorite fashion designers? Frances Bean worked for Marc Jacobs. Frances Bean is friends with Marc Jacobs. And then her mother tried to sue Marc, saying that he was stealing and all this crazy shit. There's so much involved in this. I'll try to stick to the main story. 2019, we find out that the Nirvana smiley face logo, penned by Kurt Cobain himself, because all the art came from Kurt Cobain, CDs, t-shirts, everything. Kurt was an artist. Matter of fact, the collage on the back of Nirvana Nevermind, which you can't really make out anything, but it includes a painting of Dantes Inferno, people being trampled on one of the circles of hell, diseased vaginas, slabs of beef, the band members from Kiss standing on a slab of beef on top of diseased vaginas. Now, before you're like, ooh, gross, what was Kurt thinking? I think he was trying to teach a lesson. Gene Simmons is a man who has bragged about all of his conquest, how many women he's slept with around the world, and I think what Kurt was saying was, hope you enjoy those STDs, Gene Simmons. Back to the original point. I was riding in a Jeep in 2019 with my friend Jonathan and a couple of other people when an article popped up on one of their phones, and they said, Dave Grohl is suing this guy. This guy is using the Nirvana smiley face logo, or I would call it inebriated face logo, on his t-shirts. Dave is suing Marc Jacobs over this, and we were all mad about it. Man, that's Kurt Cobain's illustration, but for some reason it had never been copyrighted or trademarked or whatever it needed to be. It just never happened, and Marc Jacobs countersued, saying, well, you don't own this because you never legally copyrighted it, and this is an ongoing thing. Before I continue with my little anecdote, let me ask all of you a question. Do you really think it's just a coincidence that Frances Bean worked for fashion designer Marc Jacobs, was inspired by Marc Jacobs, was friends with Marc Jacobs, and then Marc Jacobs happened to use an illustration by her father that wasn't trademarked, that wasn't copyrighted? Is it possible that Frances Bean was throwing him a bone, saying, hey, this cool design that's already recognized around the world, you know, this Nirvana design, my dad never copyrighted that. You can use it if you want to. Or on the other hand, Marc Jacobs gained Frances Bean's confidence. He gained her trust. He asked her questions. She answered them honestly, thinking it was just between friends and that he would never take advantage of her. He somehow manipulated her into revealing information about this Nirvana logo that she shouldn't have revealed, and then he stole it. I would say that's more likely. I would say that Frances Bean trusted the guy. He gained information through being friends with her, and then he took advantage of that information. What do you guys think? I'm speculating. I'm not saying that that's the truth, but you can see why I would come to that conclusion. I mean, honestly, what a jerk. He puts his initial on it with a very recognizable Nirvana design and puts the word heaven on it. It's obvious that he is trying to associate himself with Kurt Cobain. It's a very obvious Kurt Cobain is in heaven reference. Look at me, I'm up there with Nirvana. It's one person trying to ride the coattails of another person to gain notoriety and celebrity. And he did it, and he made millions of dollars off of that t-shirt. You can see here it's going for $85. Don't buy these, man. This is a blatant ripoff. Now, back to the original anecdote I was telling. And I remember I had just finished a 100-year-old copy not this book, another book, obviously, a 100-year-old hardback copy of The Divine Comedy that my friend Lee let me borrow. I'd seen the illustration done by C.W. Scott Giles, The 9 Circles of Hell, which is just circles within circles, some writing. And I knew that it was on Nirvana t-shirts, and I said out loud to everybody in the vehicle, holy shit, Dave Grohl just opened up a can of worms. After all, how are you going to sue someone who's using something that you really don't legally have trademarked when your own company is doing the same thing? It's hypocritical. You're opening up discussion for morals, and you're not in a position to be preaching. Why? Because Dave was suing someone for using an illustration that was not trademarked or copyrighted when he, in fact, was selling merchandise of another guy's illustration that was copyrighted. Not in the US, but in other countries. And I remember saying, Dave Grohl's going to get sued. And then it never happened. It just never happened. And when I say Dave Grohl, of course I mean Nirvana. Dave is usually the most public. He's the biggest celebrity, so that's why I say Dave Grohl, and it never happened. I thought immediately that somebody from Dantes Inferno camp, this illustration, would come forward and say, well, hey, you're using my shit. So let's speculate on that for just a second. Giles died a long time ago, and Susan Bundy, Jocelyn Susan Bundy, the woman who is suing Nirvana LLC, she's the granddaughter of C.W. Scott Giles. I'm assuming that Giles passed this illustration to his daughter or his son, and then once that person died, it went to the granddaughter. So she just now got her hands on ownership of this illustration, and she's probably been waiting a long time to get ownership of it so she herself could sue Nirvana, which just happened Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. Remember, Nirvana's been selling this logo since 1989. I had one in like 7th grade or something. You'd think if anyone that has anything to do with that illustration cared, they would have sued a long time ago. But that never happened until now, coincidentally, 2 weeks after we start making videos about Nirvana money and poor management and all that good stuff. As for what's going to happen with this, the Marc Jacobs thing is still ongoing. This is a new lawsuit for Nirvana LLC. Kurt and Chris are going to have to go to court. They're going to have to go to war over this. In my own personal opinion, it's been 32 years since they've been using that illustration. Crimes have a statute of limitations, and so should lawsuits. Most importantly to me, I want your opinion. Do you think Marc Jacobs should have to pay Nirvana for stealing the smiley face logo, or do you think it was within his right? Do you think Nirvana, who's been using this illustration for 32 years, should all of a sudden have to pay the granddaughter of the guy who drew it back in the day because she decided she doesn't want him using it anymore? I'd love to read your comments. Next up, we're going to talk about the aftermath of Frances Bean's wedding, the whole Isaiah Silva case. We're going to get into that mess. Hang with me. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead, click the subscribe button. Thank you, members and patrons. I've got something special for you guys coming up too.